Welcome to Graphite Hub's interview series, a series dedicated to all things graphite. Now, today's a little bit different. I've brought together a panel of guests from both BlackRock Mining and POSCO International. So, to give it a bit of background, we've got BlackRock Mining is developing the Mahenge graphite project in Tanzania, one of the world's largest and most advanced flake graphite projects. And POSCO Future M is a subsidiary of POSCO Group, is a leading Korean materials company focusing on supplying key battery materials. So for anyone in the battery space, POSCO is a very well-known name. So it's great to have them on here today. So POSCO is also a key supplier of spherical graphite to both global EV and energy storage markets. POSCO is also a strategic investor in BlackRock Mining with an offtake agreement and a clear interest in securing upstream natural graphite supply. So before we jump into this, I might just hand it over to each of you just to briefly introduce yourself. So maybe John, if we start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Harry, and thank you for the opportunity to come on Graphite Hub and just talk a little bit about what we're doing because we're trying to do things a little differently here. So I'm the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of BlackRock Mining, and I've been with the project since 2017, really taking it from an exploration discovery to where we are at the moment, which is just in the process of trying to finance and then move into project execution. Been a very interesting journey over those years.
Cool, and maybe over to you, Tae-Sun.
Yeah, this is Tae-Sun Yeom, Senior Manager from POSCO International Corporation. I'm in charge of the securing raw material for the POSCO Group's lithium battery businesses. Nowadays, I focused on developing graphite supply chain for the POSCO Group's anode businesses. Nice to meet you.
Great. Well, no, it's awesome to have you both on here. So, yeah, really looking forward to this discussion. So maybe John, if we kick this off with you, we
Mm.
saw two quite significant announcements come out on Monday that seem to mark kind of real progress for the Mahenge project. Can you talk us through the broader significance of these developments and what they signal about where the project is heading from here?
Yeah, I think the way I look at a project, Harry, is there's really two features to it. There's an upper line, which is your revenue line, which talks about the resource that's in the ground, and clearly one announcement there was about our special mining license. Effectively, we had an 18-month window from 2022, and really we needed to extend that a little bit. So some dialogue with the mining commission to make sure that that license is in good standing. So tick on that one. So high grade, big flake, easy to mine type deposit. The other one is getting access to grid power. And this is absolutely fundamental to us. So what we've been able to do is put together a power supply and power implementation agreement with TANESCO, who is the electricity supplier in Tanzania. What that is all about is rather than just putting power onto the mine, we're putting on a high voltage connection to the entire region, which really begins to leverage the industrial capacity of Mahenge. So this is when you start doing public-private partnerships, and we still really start to leverage the opportunity of what a mine development can do. So bringing that together, we've locked in the revenue line by preserving the SML and locked in the cost line by connecting ourselves to grid power. So bringing that together is key fundamental.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's really good to be able to hear this kind of the progress that's been made for BlackRock Mining, given where the graphite market is at the moment. So, no, it sounds like things are all steam ahead. So, to zoom out a little bit, across the board, we're seeing a clear trend that graphite developers are increasingly looking to move more into the downstream processing side of things, aiming to capture more margin and play, I guess, a bigger role in the battery supply chain. So, with that in mind, John, would you mind just describing kind of why BlackRock Mining has decided not to pursue that path, at least for now, and instead focusing on itself as a high purity flake producer?
There's a couple of features into why we are staying at the top end of the supply chain. Firstly, being perfectly honest, as a small junior company, there's only so many things you can do at once. We're a mining company. We've got a long history individually of being miners. So what we understand is mining. So where we have to build out a supply chain, we're better off collaborating with people who do know what they're doing, and hence this very important relationship with POSCO. So, for want of a better word, you can imagine a football field. You don't put 11 goalkeepers on the field. People go into position and it works. So that's part one. And part two on that really comes back to a capital equation. When you go into this thing, you do not want to do this as a research project. You need to hit commercial scale on number one, on day one, or you're going to bleed cash. So to hit commercial scale is going to require substantial investment at the mine and then substantial investment downstream. And that's just a bridge too far again for a small junior mining company. So again, building that out, the way we can get critical mass here is build a supply chain with POSCO, and POSCO bring the IP, they bring the technology, and importantly, market access. It's just a very, very logical move at this stage of the game.
Yeah, no, that sounds like you guys are, focusing on kind of walking before you can run, kind of building the pillars to start with, and then go from there.
Absolutely.
Cool. And so it wouldn't feel right having one of these kind of interviews about graphite without mentioning China, given the scale and the influence China has over the graphite market. So with that in mind, John, could you walk us through how BlackRock Mining is building a business model that remains resilient and also investable, regardless of what is happening in China?
Yeah, look, that comes back to the quality of the deposit we're dealing with. If you look at most projects have got a very, very high fines to large flake ratio. So typically large flake, maybe 10, 15% if they're lucky. We're at 70% large flake. So it means that we have a lot of diversity in our offtake markets. Now, 1/3 of our volume goes into the fines, which is going into lithium-ion battery supply chain through POSCO. But the 2/3 of that large flake goes into traditional industrial products. And that stuff's hard to find. So what we're finding is there is good demand for that in China, and there's good demand for that in industrial regions outside of China. Importantly, it's not a contested market. Now, what that means for our basket price is even at 10-year lows for fines, our basket price is about twice our operating cost. So we have, for want of a better word, if I could think of this as an inducement price, what's the price concentrate needs to be to justify a new mine? We're well above inducement price because of the proportion of large flake we had. If we had a lot more fines, which is more typical of a graphite project, we would be below inducement price, and there isn't that signal to build capacity. So we've got this opportunity to go through now, build it, and hopefully as fines prices normalise again, there's just more good news for the project.
And exactly at the moment, we're seeing some of these graphite companies out there that are producing are losing cash, significantly as each quarter goes on, just based on where the graphite prices are. So it's quite promising to hear that your sales prices, are a lot higher than your operating cost. Cool. So maybe moving over to you, Tae-Sun. So when it comes to graphite projects, there's no shortage of options. At Graphite Hub, I think I track about 83 graphite companies globally. So it's clear POSCO has a kind of a wide field to choose from. So if you wouldn't mind, would you mind just explaining about BlackRock, why POSCO decided to choose BlackRock Mining and the Mahenge project in particular, and why it kind of stood out as a strategic investment?
Well, POSCO Group has started reviewing the graphite mine in order to minimize the dependence of the Chinese graphite since 2018. At the time, we reviewed almost every graphite project in the world, and we have chosen mining project by considering size of the reserve and the graphite purity and logistics and the management of the project operator and the geopolitical locations and so on. So that's why POSCO invested into the Berlingman mining in 2021. And nowadays, more graphite mines have been developed, and it seems some mines look promising. So that's why currently POSCO is in reviewing those projects too. But our first priority is to develop the Mahenge project to be in production as soon as possible at the moment.
Yeah. No, it's understandable. I think there's a lot of companies out there that are either exploration or developing graphite projects, but the time frame to bring those projects online, can take many years. So, yeah, I can understand with BlackRock, kind of going to be a near producer, so can understand
Yeah.
the attractiveness. Now, there's an ongoing debate around synthetic versus natural graphite, and I might hand this one over to you, John, especially
Yeah.
as I guess battery chemicals continue to evolve. And so, from my understanding, is that silicon tends to blend better with natural graphite just due to its structural advantages and better performance under expansion stress. Are you seeing this feedback reflected from your downstream partners and potential customers?
I think I'll answer half the question and I'll flip it over to Tae-Sun to answer the second half because I think, yeah, a very technical question there from POSCO. But I think two elements from synthetic that need to be brought to mind
Yeah,
is firstly, most of the synthetic capacity we see at the moment is cash negative.
yeah,
There was a big build out during COVID. They turned it on and they've swapped it. What we're seeing on synthetic at the moment is we're starting to see prices for feedstock. So pet coke has doubled in the last 6 months. And that's just simply a virtual feedback that goes on in China that says we convert transportation or electrify transportation, liquid fuel demand drops off, therefore oil refining drops off, therefore pet coke is a shortfall, and we start to have this virtual cycle. So synthetic prices are heading north. And that's really good news for natural flake. But when you make a SPG element, you make a little spherical, purified spherical balls of graphite, it would be the right word, because you mechanically deform these things in the manufacturing processes, there are layers that allow silicon gas, silane gas, to permeate into the SPG. And that's how we can increase the silica content of SPG because there is that sort of deformed boundaries we can get in on it. It's really difficult to do that with synthetic. It's much more structurally sound, which has got some positive features, but it does mean it's diabolically hard to get silica into that. So as we start to see higher performance anodes, we're looking at a lot more. The ability to get silicon into that anode is beginning to be very, very important into anode performance. And Mr. Yeom, would you maybe want to add on to that one?
Well, actually, I'm not an engineer, but it seems I basically agree with you. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's interesting to hear that because I think at the moment, there is just so much commentary around the competition between natural and synthetic. So yeah, quite nice to be able to understand that in a bit more detail. So thank you. Um, and maybe a broader question for you, Tae-Sun. So POSCO Future M is clearly, and both POSCO International is clearly a major player in the downstream graphite space. You've established agreements, both binding and non-binding, with several of the graphite companies that I track on Graphite Hub. And just notably, a few weeks ago, POSCO announced a $277 million investment into domestic spherical graphite production. Quite a significant move that caught the market's attention. So, what message is POSCO sending to the graphite market with this type of investment?
Well, as I mentioned that POSCO International is the trading house, the POSCO Group. So we have discussed with the main affiliate of the POSCO Group, especially nowadays POSCO Holdings and POSCO Future M. So we have discussed about this investment for a long time. So in my opinions, this investment is a part of the POSCO Group's broader strategy to achieve the supply chain independence. The move is expected to significantly reduce the reliance on the overseas suppliers, particularly China, and the lower risk associated with the material price volatility and supply instability with the global anode market rapidly expanding. the establishment of a stable and self-sufficient and cost-effective supply chain is set to be a critical factor in ensuring the profitability and competitiveness. By creating a fully integrated value chain from African mine to domestic production, we have secured a key competitive edge in our anode material business. The investment lays the foundation for sustainable growth in global battery material market.
Great. No, it's really encouraging to hear, and it's a positive direction for the sector. And I think investors will be happy to start to see that graphite is getting this kind of attention and strategic interest again. So maybe before we wrap this up, does anyone have any final thoughts or comments they'd like to share?
Well, I think to me, what the relationship with POSCO represents, and it's just a maturing of the sector, and it's this transition from lab scale type work to something that is a very clear, defined supply chain that behaves in very much the same way any other mineral commodity behaves. So you've got producers, you've got intermediate process, and then you've got final sales. So, I think that's really, really important. And the underlining message out to the investment publics looking at this is that POSCO is the world's largest anode producer outside of China. And clearly, they can see a compelling reason to want to invest in that downstream capacity because they can see the markets that's there. There's been a lot of rhetoric on about whether the market's there or not, whether the China owns all of the market. But clearly, I think we can see a credible investment from a significant industry player who really does understand this space, and they're voting with their feet. So I think looking at that, that's to me a really important message, not only to investors, but I think to the overall sector that those who know have got confidence to actually put some money on the ground. I think that's a pretty important message.
Exactly, and it's $277 million worth, right? So it is, it's quite a strong signal. Cool. Well, I'd just like to thank you both for joining this conversation, and we hope that the both investors in BlackRock mining and the broader graphite market do find interest in these type of conversations, and especially having a representative from POSCO International for sharing such valuable insights. So appreciate both of your time, and we look forward to having you again on here in the future.
Thank you, Harry. Been honoured to be here.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of Graphite Hub's interview series. We'll see you next time.